In the winter of 1986, the waters off Yonaguni Island were calm enough for a routine dive. Yonaguni sits at the far western edge of Japan, closer to Taiwan than to Tokyo. It is a small island, known more for fishing and strong ocean currents than for archaeology. On that day, local diver Kihachiro Aratake was surveying the seabed, looking for new spots where hammerhead sharks might gather. Instead of sharks, he found stone. Beneath him, rising from the seafloor, was a massive rock formation that did not look like a reef. It was too flat, too sharp. The surface formed wide platforms, each one stepping down to the next like a giant staircase. Long straight edges ran for tens of meters. Corners met at angles that felt deliberate. Aratake later said he had never seen anything like it in his years of diving. He marked the location and reported it to researchers on the mainland. At first, there was quiet interest. Then, when surveys began, the scale of the site became clear. The main structure stretched roughly 150 meters from end to end. It rose more than 25 meters from the seabed. Some surfaces were as smooth as floors. Others formed vertical walls, almost like the sides of a pyramid cut into the bedrock itself. Divers could swim along what looked like corridors and ledges, following straight lines that rarely appear in natural reefs. Soon the site gained a name, the Yonaguni Monument. This was not a pile of stones like the Bimini Road. It was not a single rounded object like the Baltic Sea anomaly. This was a continuous mass of solid rock, shaped into terraces and steps on a scale that suggested intention. For underwater archaeology, it was one of the most striking sunken structures ever found. News of the discovery reached Professor Masaaki Kimura, a marine geologist at the University of the Ryukyus. Kimura began studying the site in the late 1990s and returned many times over the following years. He mapped the formation in detail, measured angles, and documented specific features he believed could not be explained by erosion alone. Kimura pointed to what he described as staircases, with evenly spaced steps rising at consistent heights. He noted long, flat platforms that could have served as plazas or gathering areas. He identified what he believed were carved channels and even a structure that resembled a roadway leading away from the main monument. Based on sea level models, Kimura argued that the site would have been above water more than 10,000 years ago, during the end of the last ice age. At that time, much of the world's coastline was exposed land. Humans were already present in East Asia. If the monument had been shaped then, it would belong to a period far earlier than most known stone architecture. This claim immediately drew attention. If Yonaguni were human-made, it would represent one of the oldest large-scale stone constructions in the world. It would suggest an advanced coastal culture in Japan long before recorded history. For many, this possibility was both exciting and unsettling. But not everyone agreed. Other marine geologists examined the same formation and reached very different conclusions. They focused on the type of rock involved. Yonaguni is made of layered sandstone, a sedimentary rock that naturally splits along flat plains. When fractured by tectonic forces, it can break into large blocks with straight edges and sharp corners. Southern Japan is also a region of frequent earthquakes. Over thousands of years, repeated seismic activity can shift and crack bedrock in regular patterns. Combined with strong ocean currents and wave erosion, these fractures can widen and sharpen, creating step-like forms without any human involvement. One of the strongest arguments against human construction was the lack of artifacts. No tools have been found at the site. No pottery. No carvings with symbols. No signs of dwellings nearby. In underwater archaeology, structures rarely exist alone. They are usually part of a wider landscape of human activity. At Yonaguni, there is only rock. Researchers also noted that many surfaces that appear smooth are actually uneven when examined closely. What looks like a flat floor from a distance often shows natural ripples and fractures up close. Some supposed staircases turn out to be a series of natural ledges formed along bedding planes in the sandstone. Even so, the site resists simple dismissal. Certain features remain difficult to explain with erosion alone. Some edges run in parallel lines for long distances. Some corners meet at near right angles. A few shapes appear too regular to ignore. These details are what keep Yonaguni firmly in the category of unexplained ruins for many observers. Public reaction followed a familiar pattern. Documentaries framed it as a lost underwater city. Headlines spoke of submerged civilizations and ancient ocean discoveries. The monument became a symbol of how much human history might lie beneath the sea. In Japan, the site also took on cultural meaning. It appeared in books, television programs, and museum exhibits. Local tourism grew, with diverse traveling from around the world to see the formation for themselves. At the same time, the Japanese government treated it cautiously, listing it as a geological feature under study rather than an official archaeological site. Over the years, some researchers proposed a middle position. They suggested that the formation is mostly natural, but that humans may have modified parts of it when it was above water. Simple shaping, clearing, or leveling could explain why certain surfaces appear more regular than others. This idea remains unproven, but it reflects the difficulty of drawing a hard line between nature and design. Today, nearly 40 years after its discovery, Yonaguni remains one of the most debated sunken structures in the world. It sits at the center of discussions about deep-sea mystery, lost underwater cities, and the limits of underwater archaeology. When researchers returned to Yonaguni again and again, they began to focus less on the monument as a whole and more on its individual features. It was in these details that the debate became most intense. The overall shape could be explained in many ways, but specific cuts, angles, and surfaces demanded closer attention. One of the most discussed features is a broad stepped face on the eastern side of the monument. From a distance, it looks like a staircase carved into the rock, with 5 or 6 large steps rising evenly toward the top. Professor Kimura measured the height and depth of these steps and noted that several of them share similar proportions. To him, this regular spacing suggested design rather than chance. Skeptical geologists countered with a different explanation. They pointed out that sandstone forms in layers, deposited over time by sediment. These layers create natural planes of weakness. When the rock is fractured by earthquakes or exposed to wave erosion, entire layers can break away at once, leaving behind flat ledges stacked one above the other. In tectonic regions, these ledges can be surprisingly even. Another feature often cited is a sharp corner near the center of the formation, where 2 long walls meet at close to a right angle. In most natural cliffs, corners tend to be rounded by erosion. Here, the edge appears clean and angular. Kimura suggested this could be the corner of a man-made platform or building. Opposing researchers examined the same corner and traced the fracture lines extending beyond it. They showed that the angle followed a natural joint in the bedrock, where stress had split the rock along a straight path. Over time, erosion widened the crack, leaving behind a corner that only looks artificial because of how the layers intersect. Perhaps the most intriguing detail is a narrow channel cut into one of the flat surfaces. It runs in a straight line for several meters with a consistent width. Kimura proposed it might be a drainage channel or part of a larger carved design. If true, this would be difficult to explain by natural processes alone. Yet similar channels have been documented in other sandstone formations on land. Rainwater and wave action can exploit tiny cracks, slowly deepening them into grooves that follow the rock's internal structure. When seen underwater without clear context, these grooves can look intentional. What makes Yonaguni especially challenging is that both sides can support their claims with real observations. The rock really does fracture along straight lines. The area really does experience frequent earthquakes. At the same time, some features really do appear unusually regular compared to most natural reefs. Dating the monument remains one of the greatest obstacles. Because it is carved from solid bedrock, there is no wood, shell, or bone to test directly. Researchers rely on indirect methods, such as estimating when sea levels rose high enough to submerge the site. Most models suggest the area went underwater between 8,000 and 12,000 years ago. This sets an upper limit on any possible human activity. If humans modified the site, it would have happened before that time. Archaeological evidence from Japan shows hunter-gatherer cultures existed then, but there is no record of large stone construction from that period. This does not make it impossible, but it makes it unlikely. Another line of inquiry involves nearby areas. If Yonaguni were part of a submerged civilization, there should be related sites along the ancient coastline. Surveys of the surrounding seabed have found scattered rocks and small formations, but nothing clearly cultural. No harbors. No settlements. No tool caches. This absence weighs heavily in the scientific debate. At the same time, researchers admit that coastal archaeology is difficult. Rising seas erase shorelines. Sediment buries small structures. Entire landscapes can vanish without leaving clear traces. The lack of evidence does not always mean lack of activity, but it limits what can be claimed with confidence. Over time, the tone of the debate has shifted. In the early years, positions were sharply divided. Some insisted Yonaguni was a sunken city. Others dismissed it entirely as a natural cliff. Today, more researchers accept a mixed view. The formation is natural in origin, shaped by geology and erosion, but it may have been used, altered, or at least noticed by humans when it was above water. This perspective does not require a lost advanced civilization. It only requires that early coastal people encountered a dramatic rock formation and made limited changes to it, perhaps for ritual, shelter, or navigation. Even this idea remains speculative, but it reflects a more cautious approach. For underwater archaeology, Yonaguni has become a case study in interpretation. It shows how easily natural structures can resemble design. It also shows how strong human instinct is to see intention and pattern. In the depths, where light is limited and access is rare, that instinct becomes even stronger. Despite decades of study, no final report has closed the case. No excavation has revealed tools. No inscription has been found. No layer of human debris has emerged from the sediment. At the same time, no single geological model has explained every feature in a way that satisfies all observers. Today, the Yonaguni monument remains officially classified as a geological formation under investigation. Divers still visit. Researchers still publish. The site continues to appear in discussions of unexplained ruins, sunken structures, and ancient ocean discoveries. What keeps it alive is not a single piece of evidence, but the balance of doubt. It is not clearly natural enough to forget. Not clearly human enough to confirm. It rests in that narrow space where questions remain open. As the debate over Yonaguni continued, its influence spread far beyond the waters around a single island. For many researchers and explorers, the monument became a turning point. It encouraged a new wave of underwater surveys across Japan and neighboring regions, driven by a simple question. If one large structure could remain hidden for so long, how many more might lie unnoticed along ancient coastlines? In the years after Yonaguni's discovery, Japanese marine institutes expanded their seabed mapping programs. Sonar surveys along the Ryukyu Island chain revealed submerged terraces, cliffs, and ancient shorelines now buried beneath tens of meters of water. Most of these features were clearly natural. But a few, like stepped ridges and flat platforms, raised familiar questions. Each new find was compared to Yonaguni, sometimes fairly, sometimes not. This comparison had an important effect. It forced underwater archaeology in the region to become more careful. Researchers began developing stricter criteria for identifying possible human modification. Straight lines alone were no longer enough. Right angles were no longer enough. What mattered most was context. Artifacts, repeated patterns, and connections to known human activity on land. At the same time, Yonaguni shaped how the public thought about submerged civilizations. Before 1986, most discussions of lost underwater cities focused on the Mediterranean or the Atlantic. After Yonaguni, East Asia entered the conversation. Books and documentaries began to explore the idea that early coastal societies might have existed along what are now drowned shorelines from China to Indonesia. This shift was not entirely speculative. Archaeological work on land showed that humans in East Asia had lived near the coast for tens of thousands of years. Rising seas at the end of the Ice Age would have flooded many of their settlements. In recent years, submerged stone tools and campsites have been found in shallow waters off Japan and Korea. These finds confirm that real submerged archaeology exists in the region. What they do not confirm is monumental stone architecture. This distinction became central to how Yonaguni was viewed. It is one thing to accept that early humans lived along drowned coasts. It is another to claim they carved massive stepped monuments into bedrock. The first idea is supported by evidence. The second remains unproven. For Professor Kimura, Yonaguni remained a symbol of how much history might still be missing. He continued to publish studies arguing for human involvement, refining his interpretations as new data became available. His work kept the debate alive within Japan, even as international interest slowly faded. Other researchers used Yonaguni as a teaching example. In geology courses, it became a case study in how natural processes can mimic design. In archaeology programs, it illustrated the danger of interpreting structures without cultural context. Few sites have been as useful in showing both the promise and the limits of underwater interpretation. The monument also changed how funding agencies approached deep-sea mystery claims. After seeing how quickly speculation could outpace evidence, many institutions began requiring stricter review before supporting underwater expeditions tied to ancient civilization theories. This did not stop exploration, but it raised the standard for what counted as serious research. For divers, Yonaguni became a pilgrimage site. Descending along its terraces, swimming past its walls, it is easy to understand why the formation feels artificial. Human eyes are trained to see patterns. Flat surfaces suggest floors. Steps suggest movement. Corners suggest buildings. Underwater, without familiar scale or lighting, these impressions become even stronger. This human response is part of the story. History beneath the sea is harder to read than history on land. Erosion blurs edges. Sediment hides layers. Tools decay. What remains are shapes, and shapes invite interpretation. Yonaguni shows how quickly interpretation can become belief, and how slowly belief can return to question. Today, most professional organizations in Japan describe the monument as a natural geological formation, possibly used by humans in the distant past but not constructed by them. This wording is careful. It leaves space for uncertainty without making claims that evidence cannot support. In recent years, attention has shifted to new sites. Submerged villages in the Black Sea. Stone structures near India. Ancient harbors in the Mediterranean. Each new discovery is measured against the lessons learned at Yonaguni. Are there artifacts? Is there context? Is there repeatable evidence? This is Yonaguni's lasting contribution. Not proof of a lost city. Not confirmation of an ancient empire. But a reminder of how science works when the subject lies beyond easy reach. It teaches patience. It teaches restraint. It teaches that unanswered questions are not failures, but invitations to look more carefully. As long as parts of the seafloor remain unmapped, there will be more sites like this. Some will turn out to be natural. Some will prove to be cultural. Most will sit in between for a long time. Yonaguni remains where it has always been, carved by forces we partly understand and partly do not. It is not a solved mystery, but it is no longer an unstudied one. It stands as a boundary marker between geology and archaeology, between imagination and evidence.